Welcome to the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting Podcast. I'm your host, Anna.gray. The best thing about being a nurse and entrepreneur over the last 25 years are the relationships I've developed and the people I've met. As a legal nurse consultant, I wanted you to hear from those amazing people in the legal and healthcare communities. I wanted you to hear who they are and to celebrate them with me. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered. Let's dive into the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting Podcast. I'm really super excited. I think it's been a long time coming. I'm super excited to have my guest Jessica here. Jessica, thank you so much for being here. And I don't know why it took me so long to have you on here, but I'm really appreciative of you being here. So thank you.
Awesome. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, Jessica, let's start off by saying, where in the world are you coming from? I'm on the West Coast. Where are you coming from?
Currently, I am coming from my camper, which is parked in Western New York. Yes, in the freezing cold.
Oh my gosh. Are you warm enough in there?
I'm currently building a new house here. I moved back to where I grew up to help take care of my father full time.
Okay.
And so while the house is under construction, I am working out of my camper.
Wow. See, you don't hear that every day. This is one of the things I love about this podcast is you get to know people and their stories of like who they are as a human versus a little thumbnail on, a platform. So I would have never known that. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. So you grew up in New York. Yes, you said. Yeah. And what was your journey like? Where did you go to school? Did you go to school for nursing? I always like this question. We all have taken different routes. Did you go to school for something else? What was your trajectory when you first started out as like a young human?
So nursing was the farthest thing from my brain growing up. I grew up on a dairy farm. My intention was to take over the farm from my family, but circumstances led to the fact that I wasn't going to take over the farm. And so I had to come up with another plan. And at 18 years old, I raised my right hand and enlisted in the United States Navy.
Wow.
And
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. I started out in nuclear engineering, believe it or not.
Okay. Sounds very smart.
I did that for, 4 years, and they decided that they were going to send me to college on an ROTC scholarship.
Yeah.
And so I went to the University of Pittsburgh, started out with mechanical engineering, and then 9/11 happened. And we were all, my class were juniors at the time. And we were told that we needed to finish by the end of the year or we were going to lose our scholarships. So I had to figure out what I could graduate with. With all of the credits that I had accumulated.
Okay.
So I transferred to environmental studies.
Oh, okay.
The last year with an environmental studies degree. Yeah. And then went back on active duty as an officer, received my commission, and decided to go to flight school.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, very
love this. I'm here for this. Yes. Okay.
So after flight school, I flew in the mighty EP-3, which is a reconnaissance aircraft, which I'm not dating myself here, but it's been decommissioned and the last flight is about to take place of this aircraft.
Wow.
But we did a lot of the super secret squirrel stuff. Collected data. I was in the back as a naval flight officer that specialized in strategy and intelligence gathering.
Okay. Wow.
So I did that for over a decade, and then I went on aircraft carriers as the tactical action officer, defending the ship and helping with the strategic planning and the tactics for warfighting. Wow. And then after 17 and a half years, I left active duty and transferred into the reserves due to the troop drawdown that was occurring. And they said I had to grow up and get a real job.
After all that fun?
After all that fun.
Wow.
During this time, I lived on a small island north of Seattle, and I had transferred to multiple Navy bases in the greater Puget Sound area over the years. And I was a volunteer EMT with my local fire department and had been for many, many years. And I decided that I was going to try nursing school. Went through in Washington State, you have to get your CNA first before you can even apply to nursing school. So I went and got my CNA and did all of my prerequisites over again because it had been
so long.
It had been so long since I took all my basic sciences. And so I was working as a CNA. I was a Navy reservist and working at the fire department. And that's kind of how my journey continued. I got into an accelerated nursing program at Indiana State University, which is where I graduated from, and then went back to Washington and started working in critical access hospitals. I did med-surg and then ER. I became a union officer while I was in the emergency room, which is how I kind of fell in love with the legal side of nursing. I was involved in a lot of investigations into accusations against staff members and defending their actions or helping them move on to other facilities or places. After about 3 years at that facility, I started travel nursing. And I did ER and like critical care response team travel at different hospitals all over Puget Sound through COVID. And I would always take the summer off and then drive all the way from Washington to New York in the camper.
Really?
I would spend a couple of months during the summer with my dad. And then last year, my trip got a little extended. Dad needed a little bit more help. And I decided that it was time to move home. So I've been doing legal nurse consulting full time for the last year and a half. And, taking care of my father full time, which, I often get asked a question, but you left the bedside. And I'm like, well, what's your definition?
Not exactly. Your skills are still there because you're using them.
I'm using my nursing skills every day.
Absolutely.
So
wow. Okay. I want to unpack a little bit of this because this seems like you've been on this journey for 100 years. I mean, there's so much in your story that it's amazing. Again, one of the reasons why I love this podcast is because you just never know people's stories. And I mean, we're all at the end of the day, we're all nurses, but we've all had these different, this journey that's changed. Some go straight, some go all around and about, and you were one of them. So my first question then is, when you, after 17 years of like, that's all you know, was that a really big transition into like, what's next? Or were you excited about, what was that like? Were you hesitant?
It was one of the most difficult things I've ever done.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
I struggled. I struggled a lot. Transitioning out of the military was difficult for me because, like you said, it was all I knew. My military family had become my family because I was so far away from, my, biological family.
Right.
And, now I had to basically reinvent myself, pull myself up by my bootstraps and come up with something new.
Yeah.
Transitioning into the nursing world also was probably the most difficult thing.
Yeah.
I was 15 plus years older than most of the nurses.
Sure.
I was
like
working
your
with.
second career. Yeah.
So I had to, come up with a way to run circles around them, or at least keep up with them.
Yeah. And so I think based on what you told me in the, jobs that you had in the military, it was a very analytical brain, which obviously now as a legal nurse comes right back, full circle, which brings me to, why did you choose nursing, coming from that analytical engineering strategic mindset that you had for so long? What made you choose nursing?
Well, I didn't want to go into a 3-letter identifying government agency, which is what an intelligence officer or strategic planning officer would typically do.
Right.
I didn't want to live in DC or in any of the large metropolitan areas that would require me to use, that specific skill. But I figured I could apply it to something else. Believe it or not, what actually made me decide to go into nursing was I was working at the fire department, and I had just gotten off shift, and I had gone home, and a call came in for a pedestrian, bicyclist versus motor vehicle accident less than a mile from my house.
Right.
And so I immediately jumped in the truck and drove to the accident. And, I had my radio on, and there was nobody even close. And it was me and another firefighter that lived around the corner from where the accident happened. And a woman was pinned underneath the tire of a truck. And we had to use all the skills we had available with no equipment other than what we had in our own personal vehicles to get this woman out. And so everything just kind of kicked into gear. Our skills worked together. We were able to get this woman out just as EMS was arriving. And, my forethought to call for a, rescue helicopter to get airborne to get to the scene, because I knew the extensive trauma that this woman had. And we were able to get her to the trauma center. And a couple days later, the surgeon at the trauma center had called my fire chief and said, I don't know who your medic was that was on scene, but not only did they save this woman's life, but they kept her out of a wheelchair because of how they protected her spine and how they were able to get her here so quickly.
Wow.
And so that's when I kind of thought, well, maybe emergency medicine is where I need to go.
Yeah.
Nursing school was going to be the easiest transition for that.
Sure. Wow. No, that makes complete sense. And, it's almost like you definitely used your life skills, right, from before, and you were still able to use that analytical brain, and yet you were, making a difference in someone's life. So it does make complete sense on why you would have chosen nursing the way you did, because I find that actually, after talking to a lot of people, it's either something in their life that they experienced, either, a family member or themselves going through something like this, or it was like, my mom was a nurse, or someone in the family was actually a nurse. Those seem to be kind of the two different reasons. I always want to ask that, like, how did you make that decision? It seems to be the only two different reasons on why people chose nursing. As I say that, I realize I am neither of those. so maybe that's why I ask the question so often, because I think it's still a question for me. Like, if someone were to ask me that same question, I don't know if I could give them the answer, because I really don't know, with the exception of my mom. There's a sign downstairs that I had written. It was like second grade. I want to be a nurse when I grow up. I don't remember writing that, but my mom says, clearly you wanted to be a nurse. And I don't know. And then one day I was like, I guess I'll be a nurse, I don't know. It's funny. That may be why I ask that question so often, because I'm always curious, and it wasn't anything in particular that was impactful in my life, or my mom wasn't a nurse, but typically that's what people's experiences happen to be, those that I talk to here. Okay. So we transitioned into nursing, and we are up in the Pacific Northwest, up in that area. Was there any reason you had gone up there? So you were working in the Navy up that way, and then you went to Indiana for nursing school. So was it like a program that you just wanted to get into? Is that why?
It was the first program that accepted me.
Okay, fair enough.
I had been on a waiting list. Like I said, in Washington State, you have to get your CNA first.
Right.
And then there was a 2-year waiting list to get into any nursing program anywhere in the whole state.
Wow. Okay.
And I didn't, I didn't want to wait. I wanted to, I wanted to jump in. And so I had a program and I was accepted. My credits transferred and I went.
And nothing was holding you back. You didn't have, didn't have kids or anything. Because a lot of times that seems to be part of the equation as well. It's like, well, here's my situation. I can only do it here, So the freedom to be able to, get up and go and clearly you wanted it badly. And I get that, the whole keep applying. And especially if this is your second career, you're like, I don't want to wait and keep applying and hope I get in. Like, just get me there. Right. So, yeah, I totally understand that. My daughter's going through that same thing right now. She graduated with her bachelor's and she's coming back home to go to nursing school. And she's going to a school that's like, accepts people. It's a lot more money, but they accept people. They've got a great program, but it's really like, I don't want to keep applying. I've already done that. We're ready to move on. Yeah, I get that.
For all the nursing shortage that that we have in the country, why can't we get more schools?
Right. Or more cohorts or more, opportunities at those same schools. That's the crazy thing is that I know out here in Southern California, the programs, it's like they do these really hard to get into full programs are once a year, maybe twice a year, it's just like, okay, well, if I don't get in right away, that just puts me out a whole nother year. And you would think that there would be, like you said, with the nursing shortage, there would be more opportunities. Unfortunately, the only way to get more opportunities is to pay for those opportunities. Yep. And here we are. But the great thing about nursing is that there's so many things, so many aspects of nursing that we can do. And we're usually the legal nurse side is proof of that because we've gone this and we've done, everybody has different specialties. And we end up here. So I'm always a big fan of nursing for that reason. And the fact that you can start off and be this very analytical, you've got this analytical career and you end up in something that people wouldn't necessarily assume is analytical. But here you are. You treated patients. You took care of people, and you can still be an engineer by trade, I suppose. Do you miss any bit of that action? Not the nursing side, because I know you did the ER and things like that, but like the military side of things.
I still consider myself a bit of an adrenaline junkie.
Yeah, okay.
I fully retired from the military 2 years ago after 25 total years.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's been fun, reinventing my civilian life, if you would, I guess.
Sure.
But I find my adrenaline in other areas, like analyzing medical records is really fun for me because I get to use my analytical brain, my nursing brain, and the adrenaline junkie search till you find what you're looking for brain. Yeah. I'm a competitive golfer. So that's where I usually get my adrenaline from. Most people don't think golfing can be adrenaline inducing.
Oh, no.
Certainly can.
Oh, no. We'll have to take this one offline too, but there's a story about golf I grew up in a very big golf family.
I recognize your brother.
Yes, there you go. That's where I was going. I grew up in a big golf family. I did start playing golf before he did. But I am the black sheep in the family, and I just didn't have the patience for it. And so I picked up playing hockey as an adult. And so now I wish I have a beautiful set of clubs in my garage. I wish that I had continued the skill of golf so I can appreciate how hard it is, how challenging it is. And I wish that I had the skill. It's never too late. But I totally can appreciate that side of you. Yay, golfer!
We'll have to go to Top Golf sometime.
I know, right? But I'm horrible. So I can swing a club, but not very well. Wow. Okay, so that's where you get your. I was going to ask you actually where you manifest your adrenaline junkie side now, because it's usually got to run it. Put it into one thing or another. But I can totally relate to the adrenaline junkie in the fact that you're diving in these records. Because there is a blip in time during my own journey that I was a clinical systems analyst. I went from nurse management into being the only RN in the IT department at a hospital out here in LA. And it was a lateral move because it was a management role, but I mean, I was never an analyst before, but let me tell you, it was certainly fun to dive in. And that's part of why legal nursing for me, for the same reason, you just get excited about finding and then you end up down a rabbit hole. And so I understand most people wouldn't necessarily call that an adrenaline junkie, but I can see that. I can see how that is too. And the fact that your history is very analytical and strategic and all of those things. So it makes complete sense. So, okay. So you decided first of all, you're going back and forth from the East Coast, West Coast to the East Coast. And then you decided to go into legal nursing after doing traveling, after doing, your own med surg and ER nursing. How did you find out about legal nursing? Because I like to ask people too. It's like, oh, a friend of mine or an attorney friend of mine or someone on social media, or it just popped up, or I had heard it 20 years ago. That was my story. I heard it 20 years ago and then it popped back up many years later. So what was that like for you? How did you hear about legal nurse consulting?
I was traveling at a very large hospital in Washington, and we had a Sentinel event in our ER, and I was not part of the direct care team, but I was the one who was doing the charting during the event that occurred.
Right. Okay. Yep.
The RN that runs in and does all the typing.
Yep. The scribe.
The scribe. Yep. I got called and questioned by the attorney who was representing the family.
Okay.
And I was asked a bunch of questions about the documentation, and I was able to explain all of my documentation. I thought I was done and was getting ready to leave the room. And so then he said, well, let's talk about this documentation. So he asked me about another nurse's documentation. And he had this whole idea in his head of what that document meant. And I said, no, that's not what that nurse was saying. You have to read what she's saying and then look at what she's charting, and you have to compare the two. And it completely changed his strategy for how he was going to, argue his case.
Sure.
And then a couple months later, the hospital settled, which they should have, because it was a very, very bad incident.
Yeah.
And he called me and said, you're really good at what you do. Have you ever thought about consulting on medical malpractice cases? And I'm like, huh? What?
Right.
I'm a nurse.
Yep.
And he's like, well, no, I've got, I'd love to have you come over or, send you some of my records and have you take a look. And that's how it started. I started with him.
Yeah.
And then he told one of his friends, hey, I've got this nurse. She's great. Let's have her look at that case you were talking to me about. And I figured, well, don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just looking at stuff. So I better, get some education. So I started getting as many books on the subject as I could, joining organizations, and just reading as much as I possibly could. And then I thought, well, wow, I can really use my strategy and tactics and analytical brain and my nursing brain, and I can really make a go of this. So then I started my own business, and it's just grown and grown. Now I have clients from Alaska to Florida and the Virgin Islands and everywhere in between.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that. That's another reason I asked that question, because you just never know how people started. And so I'm so glad I asked you that, because it was somewhat an experience that you had that led you into this. Did you know that this was even an option? And I know for me, it was just kind of years ago when I was a young nurse, it was like I kept getting pamphlets, and that's when pamphlets were a thing, and mailers. And I thought, oh, I was a young nurse. This sounds cool. But, and then many years later, like, I've been a nurse for 25 years. Well, I've seen everything. This makes complete sense. And kind of the same thing. I could use my analytical brain and my nursing brain. It's kind of the perfect fit. But the fact that you went through an experience and could see it, how it worked in real life, is really, there are a few people that I've run into that they've experienced that same thing, where that was like something that went on in their hospital that you got to see that side of it. We don't necessarily, we all try to, when we were taught nursing, we all try to avoid that meeting with risk management or whoever, or the attorney. So I'm glad, thank you for sharing that. Okay, so you dove into legal nursing, you educated yourself, you decided this is definitely for me. What was did you have any hesitation? Were you like, no, I'm doing this. I can totally do this. You have that.
I loved it from the very beginning.
Yeah. You're like, I'm making this happen. Okay. So you jumped in with both feet. Did you have attorneys that you had already connected with that you started? How did that look like for you in the beginning? Because I know that a lot of people that listen to this podcast are just starting out, and you're such a good advice person. You give such solid advice on the boards and in the groups, and so I really wanted to talk to you about that too, because I know a lot of people listen to this that are just getting started, and your experience getting started and your advice on getting started is very valuable. So first of all, what did that look like for you? How did you get started? And then what would your advice be on those first steps for someone?
So, wow, a lot to unpack on that question.
I know, it's a loaded question.
I had the first, phone tip. I had the first attorney that I had worked with on that specific case. But, he only took a handful of cases a year. So he had asked me to help on one or two, which was not going to be enough for me to sustain myself, not even as a side hustle. So I took some programs to try and increase my marketing and try and develop my business skills. And I had so many epic failures along the way. And I struggled to get new clients. I went 8 or 9 months after I did my initial LNC training before I even had a bite. Okay. And it just happened to be that it was that lawyer that I worked with told a friend, said, hey, give this girl a call. And I got my very first case as a legal nurse consultant. Because first one I helped, but I wasn't actually consulting on the case. And oh my God, I screwed up so epically on this case.
Okay.
I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. I put way too many details into my report that had nothing to do with the case at hand. Okay. So I had this giant product that wasn't usable. The attorney was very disappointed. He's like, this isn't what I want. And I said, I will fix it for free. You tell me what you want. Let's get you what you want.
Right.
I started doing everything he asked me to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up with a better product.
Okay.
And I spent 8 hours fixing this report.
Mm-hmm.
And I happened to be visiting my dad at the time. So I was in my camper and I was parked outside. And my camper has its own internal power source. And I didn't realize that the internet had gone down.
Oh, no.
So I had spent 8 hours working on this report to fix it for this gentleman, for this attorney.
Yeah.
And I had saved it and saved it and saved it. And it wasn't saving to my Dropbox, which is where I thought it was being saved to.
Right.
And so I got all excited and, I clicked send to the attorney from the Dropbox the next morning when after I got up. And within an hour, the attorney called me and said, this is the worst thing I've ever seen.
Oh, my God.
There's so many typos and there's just large sections missing. And I was mortified. I was mortified.
Yeah.
And I immediately ran to my computer and I pulled up what he was looking at.
Sure.
And I realized what had happened. None of the work that I had done had saved to the Dropbox. Thankfully, I knew that my Mac always backs up a copy on my hard drive.
Right. Yeah.
And so I immediately said, oh my God, I'm sorry, I sent you the wrong file. I sent him the new file. I said, I'm not going to charge you for any of this. This is my fault.
Right.
And he goes, I don't care. I've had to ask you twice to fix this. We're done. I'm not paying your bill. We're never working together again. So, right off the bat, I learned the hardest lesson, in my business is, the attorney comes first and first impressions are everything.
Yeah.
And to make sure to check your Dropbox.
Yeah, no, okay. So I'm so grateful that you shared that because it just shows that, especially you're very good about giving advice. It shows that your advice that you give people is so warranted because you're giving them what not to do because you went through. I can only imagine, especially when you're starting out, that happens and you go, you know what? Maybe this is not for me. I mean, it can happen, but clearly you got past that. I mean, but I can only imagine what, okay, I thought I could do this. Maybe this is not meant for me. Maybe, what am I doing wrong? But here you've taken it and now you've made this incredibly successful business and you're very kind in sharing what not to do. And it just shows, here's why, because you've gone through it. You've made the mistake that everybody's mortified to make. And here you are on the other side of that, have grown from that clearly. And when you say, that the attorney comes first, they do. And so obviously, double, triple check before you send, right? So you probably have a little PTSD from that still. You check 5 times before
10
you
times.
send. Yeah. No, I get that too. Now, how did you move past that? Because clearly you did. How did you move past that?
So I knew that relationship was over.
Sure. Sure.
Accepted that. I had joined a organization called The Jerk. Mm-hmm. And I had, a bunch of wonderful mentors in that organization. Mm-hmm. And, they helped me get over my PTSD from that incident.
Yeah, lifted you up.
Mm-hmm. And they said, don't give up. You're really good at this. You just got to hit them with the next one.
Yeah.
And I had also teamed up with a couple of, other LNCs that I had met in different programs. Mm-hmm. And along the way, and a very good friend of mine, Tim Kane, mm-hmm. who is from the Buffalo area. Yep. We had gotten together and he had introduced me to some of his clients that he had worked with. Mm-hmm. And to this day, I am extremely grateful for him making that introduction because, some of the introductions that he made are some of my best clients.
Wow.
And, so Tim and I went door to door knocking on attorneys' doors, and we took little bags of candy with our card, my brochure, and then one client turned into 2 clients, and then 2 law firms turned into 3 law firms, and it just continued to grow from there.
Yeah.
I started doing exhibiting at different, I started with big exhibits, like at the National Trial Lawyers Academy and MTMP and some of the biggest conferences that exist for lawyers. And it was expensive.
Sure.
And I didn't get a lot of return on investment at those big conferences. Right. So then I started going to smaller conferences. And those had huge returns on investment because I was in front of a smaller group and I was able to be more personable. I wasn't in a sea of 500 other vendors that was just begging for one attorney's attention. And then I started doing presentations myself and speaking engagements. And as it's grown over the last, 2 years that I've been actively marketing and actively seeking out organizations and building that trust factor that everybody talks about. And then I stopped advertising last year because my clients do all of my advertising for me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. So all of that hard work, all of that, figuring it out all paid off because now
it did. But I had to try everything.
No, I get that. And you could say there are failures in the fact that these big conferences cost you a lot of money, but it was also lessons learned. Like I always say, every amount of dollar you spend on your business is a lesson learned in one way or another, whether it's taking you further or it's pushed you back. It's really only taken you further because you've learned from all of those mistakes or things that you wouldn't do again, or maybe a conversation you had at that one of those big events brought you to another conversation. It may not have brought you to a client, but it brought you to another conversation, which brought you to maybe the smaller events or something. I'm just saying this only because over the years of doing businesses and being at conferences, not necessarily, legal nurse consulting, because actually I've never had a booth, but I've done booths with other businesses. That seemed to be the case. There was always like, okay, well, I spent all of this money. It was such a waste in air quotes, but it really wasn't, because maybe I had a conversation that particular day in the hallway with someone that brought me another conversation, But on paper, it looked at like, I didn't get my return on investment because I didn't land a client. So I'm a big fan of anything that you've done has been valuable, no matter how much money you've spent or lost. It just is part of your story, and the fact that you're able to gift, your suggestions or recommendations of like what not to do is also a return, because I think that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, when someone says, and I know this because someone had just tagged you and I and a few other people, that like how valuable your input is, you've helped somebody else. So it's like you're just continuing to gift that, and it only benefits you, because it benefits the person obviously, but it benefits you because it's like validation that that you've made it that far, because we're like our worst enemies. I think, we tend to be our worst critics. And so when somebody says, thank you for your mentorship or your, whatever the conversation you had, it's like validation for you to say, look at how far I've come. Now somebody's thanking me. And so I'm giving you a big high five for that. So, and thank you for sharing that, your journey with everyone here. On the booth topic, and exhibiting in booths, the big exhibits are quite pricey and heavy. What would you say, what advice would you give someone who says, okay, I would love to try maybe a small booth somewhere? Where would you tell them to start on
So
finding?
I start with my local attorneys associations.
Okay.
Do a quick Google search, or you can even go to your state bar. They'll tell you all the different attorney organizations. You can just click through to figure out which organizations have websites. They're all going to have event calendars. I've emailed the president of the organization, said, hey, I would love to, sponsor an event, or do a lunch and learn. I do topics, I do discussion topics, XYZ.
Right.
Is there any way we could work together? Most of the presidents are dying to have people reach out to them with topics and discussions, because they rack their brains all year long trying to come up with, well, what are we going to do this month? And so don't be afraid to reach out to the presidents, or to the organization leadership. I belong to the Washington State Justice Association as a member. It's, I'm an ancillary member, so it's like a $200 plus fee per year to be an ancillary member. You're listed on their website as a vendor.
Right.
Then you get first dibs at any sponsor opportunities. And so they reach out to me and they said, hey, would you like to do a booth at our conference? I said, sure, no problem. So then, it's a small, there's usually 20 to 30 vendors.
Right.
And, more likely than not, there's one or two nurse consultants, because there's a lot of us these days.
Yeah.
But unlike the very large conferences, you're not just one person in a conference room, in a event center with 100 different tables.
Right.
And then I also had gotten some really good advice from one of the lawyers that I had met at one of those conferences that said, if you want to continue to come to these big conferences, come as a marketing ticket. A lot of times they'll sell just a ticket to attend as a marketer, or attend as a guest. And it's usually a fraction of the cost of doing a booth, and you still get admission to all the networking events. You still get, you still get to interact with the attorneys. You meet them at the bar. And when I started doing that, it was a huge return on investment. And I still got to listen to all the amazing speakers at the conference, which was nice. You weren't sitting there.
I love that advice. I love that advice. I actually feel like that is a golden ticket, like just sharing that. And again, based on my experience with other booths, and it is always at conferences, it is always, they call them the hallway conversations that are the most valuable. So if there is an opportunity for that, and you're there and you're in the hallway, or you're at the bar, or you're sitting, who you sit next to, that conversation can turn into more and more conversation. I'm so glad that you shared that. And I hope that people take advantage of that, because I can also see how it would be a really good kind of first step into, I don't know if I could do a booth. I don't know if I could speak about it. And it would be a really good first test to just have a conversation with an attorney who sits down next to you and see if, what you're saying, or practice talking, or your elevator pitch, or, whatever that looks like to you. It's a good practice zone versus like, I think people freeze up too. Oh my gosh, I have to have a booth. What am I going to do? It's just, they're frozen. So they don't do anything. So what you just said may be a great first step too, in just having the conversation outside of a phone call or a Zoom, but like really just being in conversation with someone. So thank you for sharing that. Now, for those that may be totally shy and I do not want to have a conversation with a person in person, what advice? I mean, it's fair. It's fair. There are plenty of people out there. I know that. What advice would you give them on starting out? Is it possible to be successful in being that person? Or, what advice would you give them?
Everybody is different. I started out making cold emails and cold calls, and I cringe thinking about it, because There's nothing I detest more than getting spam emailed all day long. I've maybe said a few things about that on some of the discussion boards. I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I'm more like a glass of whiskey here.
My kind of girl. Okay.
But for some people that are really good presenting themselves behind the keyboard and can market themselves well in an email and, are okay understanding that for every 1,000 emails you send, you might get 10 responses, and out of those 10 responses, only one is actually interested in what you have to say, and the rejection factor is really high, and you're okay with it. Awesome, go for it. I have tons of my LNC friends that built their business out of nothing but emails and sometimes even cold calling. That just I wasn't good at that. I hated it because I hated doing it or getting it myself. So to me, it just didn't work.
Sure.
Maybe go door to door. Maybe you're okay talking to the paralegal at the front desk and leaving your card. You don't want to talk to attorneys? Paralegals and secretaries love when somebody shows up with a little bit of, candy or a coffee mug or just something fun. Hey, I'm here. Let me know what you think. And you start to build your confidence with one, and then just keep going. Everybody's different. I've tried just about every kind of marketing out there is. Some people are really good at the social media. I have many LinkedIn queens in our little group of individuals that I'm in awe of, and I follow them religiously because it's amazing to see what they've done with just a small LinkedIn presence that has just grown into a multi-million-dollar business. So it just depends on what you're good at and what resonates with you. And most important, you just need to be consistent and just keep going, keep moving forward.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. So basically, and I talk about this probably on every episode, giving people permission. Like you have given people permission to do whatever they want to do and still be successful. It's whatever feels right to you. Do it, and you can still be successful, and you can still appreciate what other people do, and it may not be your cup of tea, and that's okay too, because whatever you did worked for you, and you're proof of that because you were consistent and you tried all sorts of things. You did not just try one thing, you tried all sorts of things, and whatever you were comfortable with obviously benefited you in the long run to where now you're not marketing. And that seems to be the case with most people, is once they find their niche and they've tried all the things and they find kind of their lane, then the rest is history. So I think that that's really good advice, that anybody can do this as long as you show up, you're consistent. And I do think, and we didn't really touch on this, but I know that this came up recently, networking with other legal nurses, I think honestly can obviously can make your business. But if you don't network with other legal nurses, I think my own personal opinion is that it will only maybe prolong the success you have. I think that when I first got into it, I didn't understand the value of the connections between other legal nurses. I didn't know. It was just so new, and it just was like, oh, they're my competition, right? Because they want what I want. But the more and more time you spend in this world, the more and more you understand just how valuable those connections really are. It's not just the, advice and mentorship. It is really, someone may need you, and if you are sitting in the corner and you're afraid to connect with people, then they won't know you're there. And so it's really valuable for everyone. I mean, I may need someone, and if you're hiding, then it's, it only benefits you to connect with people in a kind and generous and transparent way, with honestly, with no expectations, right? Nothing in return. This is what I love so much, is you just connect with people, nothing expected. But the more that I find that I know I do that, and the more that I see other people do that, the more they benefit in their business, and the more others benefit in their business. And that seems to be the running theme, I think, through this whole podcast. It's amazing how many great people we get to connect with, and how it benefits all of us. And I think it was just a piece of the puzzle that I didn't understand until I understood it. So not only being brave enough to be yourself and do what you want to do, but really connecting with other people and not being afraid to. I mean, there are people that say, we are young, and honestly, we want, and I know you would agree, is that we want this profession to be a profession that we're all proud of, right? To have a great reputation amongst the community. So, do you have any other things to say? That I know I just word vomited that whole
No,
up on my pedestal thing. But I love this community so much, because it is something that I didn't expect. And I do find that it's so incredibly valuable, not only for the advice, but really just like, we're on the same page,
I mean, I 100% agree with you. And coming from a military background, there's really no competition. Mm-hmm. You're all working together for the same goal. Right. So until you get into the higher officer ranks, and then it's all political.
Sure.
But my competitive side goes back, since I was a little kid, competing in every sport I could get my hands on.
Right.
But when I joined the nursing world is when I really started to realize that everything was a competition. Mm-hmm. And I felt terrible as a young nurse. Well, I wasn't young, but I was I was a new nurse.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
And it was everybody was out for themselves, mm-hmm. unless you got into a really good group where everybody worked together. Mm-hmm. And it was, that little group would work together and this little group.
Right.
And so when I first joined the LNC world, it was very competitive. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a new thing, but it was a newly growing industry. Right. Because of the pandemic and everything that was going on, everybody wanted to leave the bedside and join our world. Yeah. Yep. But it was all a competition to see who can get the client. I'm not going to share what I know with you, because that means you're going to get more clients than I am. And mm-hmm. a lot of programs teach that inner mm-hmm. competitiveness. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's sad, because the only time my business has grown is when I've worked with other LNCs.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yep. And the more people I connect with, and the more people that I build real, genuine relationships with. And, I can be very blunt and very harsh. That's the military officer in me. I can't help it. Yeah. It's just who I am.
Sure.
But there has never been a single person that has ever reached out to me that has asked me for help that I haven't helped.
Right.
I love helping people.
Yeah.
And there are several people that I have mentored and that I continue to work with and help them build their skills, and vice versa. Yeah. I ended up working with someone who you and I have become both very close with, Miss Maria Hagan, who is one of the best nurses I know, and just an all-around wonderful person. We met at a training, I think a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. And we started working together to try and build on this new skill that we had both mm-hmm. learned. Mm-hmm. And now both of us are excelling our businesses because we work together to share the skills that we learn. And it's not, it's it's not a detriment to either one of us. In fact, it helps us get more clients, because if I learn something from a case that she can use, and I call her and I say, hey, guess what I just found? And then she does the same. And I have this same relationship with several LNCs. With the nursing home LNCs, I work with Amy Swinehart all the time. And I say, Amy, I'm racking my brain here. I can't find this. And that woman is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to nursing.
I love her.
But, these are just a couple examples. And, there's probably been 15 nurses that I'm not even recognizing in my brain right now that have helped me get to where I am. And I am extremely grateful for them. And I return the favor tenfold.
Sure.
Because the more I build my business, the more I want to help them build theirs. Absolutely. And although I may not always come off as being the most likely person to help,
warm and fuzzy, fluffy, no, but you gift very solid advice. I think that solid advice is better than fluffy advice. I mean, that's what it comes down to. It's like, you're going to read your advice. And I really love the fact that you're here on this podcast and showing a side of you that, like, you're human. I had no idea.
I don't know.
You had all of this other part of your life. Like, it's lovely to meet people that, again, you only see them on either a thumbnail or what they post in content. And again, it's like the way that you draft your comments or your responses is very analytical brain side, because you want to help them and you want to give them very solid advice. Whereas some people may take it as, gosh, she's so harsh or whatever you want to say. It's just straight to the point. But really, you've just shown to everyone here, like, you want people to succeed. And I love that you share that. And I love that now I know more about you than just your advice, which is it's just the coolest, like, bonus that this community has brought. Before we even started this podcast, I said, this podcast has turned into something I didn't even expect. It was just an opportunity to meet new people, but it's really turned into this kind of community of people. And I'm blessed every day because I get to meet people like this first, and then it goes out to the universe. So we all have the same goal, and it's really nice to hear that. And we all have different journeys, but we all still connect because we all want to succeed. We all are very smart. We all just want to use our skills the right way. And, we're going to make mistakes. And I love the fact that you had shared your mistakes. So we could talk all day. I really appreciate you spending your time here in your camper in the cold East Coast.
The heater's on. We're good. You keep hearing it come on around me.
Okay, I don't hear it, but I believe you. I believe you. I'm here on the West Coast, and it's cold here, but it's not as cold. So where can people find you? This will all be in the show notes. If they're looking, and I know your inbox will be full. I guarantee you, your inbox will be full after this podcast. So where can they find you?
So I have a website. It's taclnc.com. So TACLNC.com. My information is there. I can be reached at jessica.shaffer at taclnc.com. There's no C in Shaffer, though. SHAFFER. Yep. I am on Facebook. I am on LinkedIn. There's probably 150 ways to reach out to me. Yeah. I'm very responsive, and I'm always happy to help.
Thank you very much. And yeah, like I said, that will be show notes, and I'm sure everybody after this podcast gets, the day that it comes out, they get an influx of messages in their inbox, and you will be no exception. That will happen. I guarantee it. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your time and everything that you've shared, and I'm really blessed to have gotten to know you more. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in this fun conversation on the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting Podcast. I hope you found this episode as inspiring and empowering as I always do. And I hope that you share this episode with your friends. If you enjoyed it, I would love it if you could leave us a review or comment, as I would love to share them in the future episodes. Or hop on over into my DMs and send me a quick message. I can be found on Instagram at anna.b.gray, on my website at limitlesslnc.com, and over on LinkedIn at anna.gray. And I want you to remember, you are limitless. Until next time.